we don't want things to be quiet ever anymore. When you feel like the purpose of your life is to gratify yourself and get things for yourself and go all the time, there's this other part of you that's the same part that can kind of is almost hungry for silence and quiet, that doesn't get fed at all, and it makes itself felt in the body in a kind of dread in here.
As I watch these David Foster Wallace interviews back, I recognise a kind of unmatched ability to look ahead and see in many ways what was coming in terms of how people would construct themselves against the images and the media they saw, and how many people would feel like they were becoming addicted or giving into that distraction, perhaps in a way that they knew was too much, but were still happily walking towards, or maybe unhappily walking towards.
Particularly now in computer and internet culture, everything is so fast, and the faster things go, the more we feed that part of ourselves, but don't feed the part of ourselves that likes quiet, that can live in quiet, you know, that can live without any kind of stimulation. I don't know. Who would say entertainment is bad? I mean, I wouldn't say entertainment is bad. But a model of life in which I have a right to be entertained all the time seems to me not to be a promising one.
I think in a lot of moments in his interviews, you can see how Foster Wallace is doing a lot of double think about how he comes across in that moment.
There are quite a few. Some of them are very short, some of them are only one line long. It is a way... See, this is what? Well, I'm just going to look pretentious talking about this.
Quit worrying about how you're going to look and just be.
He is having that kind of double think experience that is so familiar to a lot of people when, for example, a phone is pulled out at some sort of social event, and the moment is somewhat split, right? Everyone is currently in that specific moment, but then they're also in those endless potential moments in the future where that image will be viewed, and thinking about how they're going to be reflected through that image.
That the language of images maybe not threatens, but completely changes actual lived life. And I consider that my grandparents, by the time they got married and kissed, I think they had probably seen maybe 100 kisses. They'd seen people kiss 100 times. My parents, who grew up with mainstream Hollywood cinema, had seen thousands of kisses by the time they ever kissed. Before I kissed anyone, I had seen tens of thousands of kisses, of people kissing. I know that the first time I kissed, much of my thought was, am I doing it right? Am I doing it according to how I've seen it?
There's a way that it seems to me that reality is fractured right now, at least the reality that I live in. The difficulty about writing about that reality is that text is very linear and it's very unified. And I anyway am constantly on the lookout for ways to fracture the text that aren't totally disoriented. I mean, you can take the lines and jumble them up, and that's nicely fractured, but nobody's going to read it, right? So there's got to be some interplay between how difficult you make it for the reader and how seductive it is for the reader, so the reader's willing to do it. The endnotes were, for me, a useful compromise, although there were a lot more when I delivered the manuscript. And one of the things that the editor did for me was had me pare the endnotes down to really the absolutely essential.
So at the end of this video, I want to come back to some kind of direction or maybe advice that Wallace left us about how the individual might orientate themselves might need to orientate themselves in the kind of modern high distraction environment. But before that, I want to look at just a little collection of Wallace's talks on his own creative process and just creative or artistic process in general.
The biggest thing for me that was interesting about postmodernism is that it was the first text that was highly self-conscious. Self-conscious of itself as text, self-conscious of the writer as persona, self-conscious about the effects that narrative had on readers, and the fact that the readers probably knew that. It was the first generation of writers who'd actually read a lot of criticism. There was this way in which I all of a sudden realized that the point of being postmodern or being avant-garde or whatever wasn't to follow in a certain kind of tradition, that all that stuff is BS imposed by critics and camp followers afterwards, that what the really great artists do, and it sounds very trite to say it out loud, well, what the really great artists do is they're entirely themselves. They're entirely themselves. They've got their own vision, their own way of fracturing reality, and that if it's authentic and true, you will feel it in your nerve endings.
What's wrong with genteelisms, like prior to and subsequent to?
Well, I have trouble parsing your question. Genteelism seems to me to be an overly charitable way to characterize them. They are, to me, they're like puff words. They're like using utilize instead of use, which in 99 cases out of 100 is just stupid. Or individual for person. More syllables is just puffed up. Why say prior to rather than before? Everybody knows what before means. It's fewer words. And I think technically, given the Latin roots, it should be posterior to if you're going to use prior to. So if you're saying prior to and subsequent to, you were in fact, in a very high level way, messing up grammatically. But would you ever want to say posterior to? No. So you don't say prior to.
It is everywhere on the nadir you look, evidence of a determination to indulge the passenger in ways that go far beyond any halfway sane passenger's possible expectations. Here are some completely random examples. My cabin bathroom has plenty of fluffy, luxuriant towels, but when I go up to lie in the sun on the upper decks, I don't have to take any of my cabin's towels because the two upper deck sun areas have big carts loaded with even thicker and fluffier towels. These carts are stationed at convenient intervals along endless rows of gymnastically adjustable deck chairs that are themselves phenomenally fine deck chairs. Sturdy enough for even the portliest sun.
Very few of the things that I start, I finish. And then fewer still of the things that I finish anyone else ever sees. The things that other people see that I feel are alive almost always change sometime in the doing them. They're never faithful to whatever the thing, that opening thing is that gets you to go, I'm gonna write about it, at least for me.
I have this problem of thinking that I haven't made myself clear, or that the argument hasn't been sufficiently hammered home, so I will make the same point 5, 6, 7 times. And I did the E unibus plurum thing in there is an argumentative essay that I did 6 or 7 years ago, and I just gave up after that because it seems as if to make the argument truly persuasive requires 500-600 pages, and nobody wants to read it. Yeah.
So to come back to ideas around how the individual might intentionally orientate themselves in a high distraction environment, I want to end on some little clips from Wallace's commencement speech, This is Water, which will be linked below, along with all the other interviews used in this. If you enjoyed this video, if you're interested in further kind of conversation around the subject matter, go check out the free newsletter as well, which I've linked below too, as I say, completely free, and another kind of window into the stuff that I'm making around the creative process. So peace, and good luck in your work. Speak soon.
20 years after my own graduation, I have come gradually to understand that the liberal arts cliche about teaching you how to think is actually shorthand for a much deeper, more serious idea. Learning how to think really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. It means being conscious and aware enough to choose what you pay attention to and to choose how you construct meaning from experience. Because if you cannot exercise this kind of choice in adult life, you will be totally hosed. The only thing that's capital T true is that you get to decide how you're going to try to see it. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. Because the so-called real world hums merrily along on the fuel of fear and anger and frustration and craving and the worship of self. Our own present culture has harnessed these forces in ways that have yielded extraordinary wealth and comfort and personal freedom. The freedom all to be lords of our own tiny skull-sized kingdoms, alone at the center of all creation. This kind of freedom has much to recommend it. But of course there are all different kinds of freedom, and the kind that is most precious you will not hear much talked about much in the great outside world of wanting and achieving and displaying. The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline and being able truly to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty little unsexy ways every day.